Okay, we're going to do some practice on word problems. And so you have this foldable, and if you haven't already folded it, that's fine. But here in the middle, we're going to start with our consecutive numbers. So we're going to start first with the example, number 1. And so it says 3 times a number added to 6 is 15. Find the number. Okay, so we simply want to go through this statement and pick out some key information. So it first says 3 times a number. So we want to identify that algebraically. So 3 times a number, we don't know what the number is, so we'll call it x. And then it says added to 6. So we're going to add 6. And then it says is 15. Is the same thing as equals 15. So we just wrote an algebraic statement to replace that information, and so now we can solve it. So we're just going to go through by subtracting 6 from both sides. We have 3x equals 9. We divide by 3 on both sides, and we have x equals 3. So this math part here is stuff that we've been doing for a long time, but setting it up is the part that's a little bit difficult. So that's what we need to practice. So continuing on with problem number 2, and these are not actually consecutive number problems. I made a mistake earlier. They're just simply number problems. We're going to look at number 2, and we have to read the problem first and then go back and find little specific information to help us set it up. So 7 times the sum of a number and negative 119 is negative 77. Find that number. So we're going to take it little bits at a time. So first we have 7 times a number. So we have, or 7 times. So we have 7, and we know we're going to multiply it, but let's look to see what we're going to multiply it to. So 7 times the sum of a number and negative 119. So we're going to multiply it to a whole quantity. The sum of a number, we don't know what the number is, so we give it a variable, and negative 119. Okay, so we have that. Now we can continue on by looking at the next statement in there, and it says is, which means equals, negative 77. Okay, so now we have an equation that we can solve. So we'll write it out and distribute our 7x, 7 to the x and 7 to the negative 119 so that we can solve the left side, or simplify, excuse me, the left side. So we have 7x minus 833 equals negative 77. Okay, so now we're simply going to add, because we want to get the 7x by itself, we're going to add 833 to both sides, and again we do that because we want this to go away. That becomes this 0, so we have 7x equals 756. Okay, so now we're simply going to divide both sides by 7 because we want to isolate the x, and we get x equals 108. And that is your answer to this problem. Again, all of this math is not the issue. The problem that we have is getting it set up. And so that requires us to look at the word problem and carefully read each of the little sections individually and set them up algebraically, and then it looks like something that we can solve. Okay, moving on to angle problems, we have this problem, this example, number 1. Find 2 supplementary angles such that the first angle is 6 degrees more than 5 times the second angle. Now that's a mouthful, but let's take it a little bit at a time. Find 2 supplementary angles. So right there we know that we're needing 2 angles, and supplementary means that they add up to be 180. So you'll notice that we have a diagram here that shows you 2 supplementary angles. So here's one angle, and here's another angle. Okay, one of those 2 angles is going to be x, okay? And let's continue to read. So we know that, let's label one x and we'll call one y, just so that we have it. So we know that x plus y has to equal 180 degrees. That's one of our equations. Okay, and now we continue on such that the first angle, so we'll say that's angle X, the first angle is 6 more than, so plus 6, and then we're going to put whatever it's more than, 6 more than 5 times the second angle, 5 times the second angle. Okay, so it doesn't matter which one we label as which, but here we kind of figured that X is probably the bigger of the two angles, since X equals 5 times Y plus 6. So we'll say that this is X and this is Y. So we have those labeled, but we know that when we add the two of them up, we get 180 degrees. So when we look at this equation, we can use that as what we solve with. We already have a value for X. It's not a nice, neat number, but it is a value for X. So instead of writing X in that equation, we're going to write 5Y plus 6. So we have 5Y plus 6. So we've taken care of that portion. Then we're going to add, so we've got that portion. We're going to add Y to it, so we have that equals 180. So we have all of the features of this problem, that equation. We also have included this equation, and now we simply just have to solve this one. So I'm just going to slide my page up a little bit so that I can solve that. And so I'm going to combine my like terms. I have a y and a 5y, so I have a 6y plus 6 equals 180. So to get y by itself, I first have to subtract 6, and I end up with 6y equals 174. I'm going to take 174, and because y is multiplied by 6, I'm going to divide by 6 on both sides. So when I divide 174 by 6, I get 29. So y equals 29. Okay, so that's my y angle, but let's go back. We always want to go back and check to see if we answered our question. And it first asked in that question for us to find two supplementary angles such that the first angle is 6 degrees more than 5 times the second. So we only have one angle so far. So there's one. And so now we have to figure out the second one. Well, notice that we have this equation up here that tells us that x equals 5y plus 6. So now we can use that information with the y equals 29, and we can solve it. So we have x equals 5 times 29 plus 6. So 5 times 29 is 145, so we have x equals 145 plus 6, and so x equals 151. And when we add 151 to 29, we indeed get 180 degrees, which is what those two angles have to be when you add them together. Okay, so in example number 2 for triangles, we have two angles are complementary. So we could stop right there and write something down. So we have x plus y equals 90. So we have this nice picture here that shows us 90-degree angles, and we have, so this whole thing is 90 degrees. So we have an angle here and an angle here. And we know when we add the two of them together, we're going to get 90 degrees. Okay, so we can continue on. So that was the first statement. And it goes on to say the second angle measures, so we're just going to call the second angle y, and it measures or equals 80 degrees less than. So we're going to subtract 80 from something. So 80 degrees less than the first angle. So it's subtracting 80 from x. What is the measure of the first angle? Okay, so now we're only looking for the angle x, the value of x, but we still have two equations. We have this equation and that equation, and we can substitute this value for y into that y so that we can solve and ultimately find our value for x. So we're going to rewrite this equation here, and say x plus, and instead of writing y, we're going to use our new value, which is x minus 80 equals 90. Okay, so combining like terms, we get 2x minus 80 equals 90. And so now we're going to add 80 to both sides so that we can undo the subtract by 80. So that goes away, it becomes 0. So we have 2x equals 170. To undo the multiplication by 2, we're going to divide by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. We have to do the same thing to the other side, so we're dividing 170 by 2. So we end up with x equals 85 degrees. And that is our answer to that problem.